All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So my name is Himanshu Chetri, and I am the CTO at Addteq. And in today's webinar, we will be going over the best practices for migrating your Atlassian tools to Amazon Web Services or AWS. And before we dive into the core content today, I would like to start off with a brief introduction to Addteq. So Addteq is a Platinum Atlassian solution partner. We are a global organization. We have been around for more than 10 years, and we are located with our headquarters in Princeton, New Jersey, and we have additional offices in New York, LA, and multiple locations within India as well as Singapore. In terms of our core services, we provide DevOps consulting services. A lot of these tends to be around the Atlassian tool chain. And we also are partners, obviously, with Atlassian. We are a Platinum solution partner. And apart from Atlassian, we are also partners with what we consider, best of breed tools and solutions. In terms of public cloud, we are partner with AWS as well as the DigitalOcean, and then we have other technology partners like Docker, Sonatype, Dynatrace, PagerDuty, and so on. In terms of our customers, we have a wide variety of customers across multiple types of verticals. And one of the reasons why we have that wide variety of customer base is because we have both products and services. And in terms of our products, we have some apps in the Atlassian marketplace. Our flagship app is Excellent Table, which lets you create and collaborate on spreadsheets right within your Confluence instance. We have another app called Unstoppable, which makes your Atlassian tools accessible to the visually impaired. And we also have our managed hosting service called Code Factory. And Code Factory is the solution that may be of your interest in terms of you optimizing, if you're looking to optimize the way you are hosting and managing your Atlassian tools. And I will come back a bit later in terms of what are the capabilities of Code Factory. But let's dive into the core agenda for today. And in today's webinar, since the topic is, what are some best practices for migrating your Atlassian tools to AWS, we will begin by defining some of the challenges. We want to define the problem statement before looking at what AWS as well as some Atlassian tool features may be the solution to those challenges. And specifically, we'll be looking at the challenges of scale. Next, we will look at how the data center version of the Atlassian tools solve these challenges, especially in regards to scale. We will then move on to how do you deploy your Atlassian data center version of the tools on AWS. You can deploy the server version of the tools on AWS or any other public cloud as well. However, you would not be utilizing the full capabilities and power of the public cloud, and especially of AWS, if you don't use data center. And then we will go into the specific high-level architecture of each of these Atlassian tools on data center and AWS. And then we will also cover some of the key migration steps and strategies that you need to be aware of. If you've joined this webinar, you most likely don't need an introduction to the Atlassian tools. Atlassian tools are ubiquitous these days. There are both the cloud as well as the server version of these tools. You could be hosting these tools yourselves, or you could be using the Atlassian cloud. Most of the content today will be relevant to you if you are relying on Atlassian tools for your day-to-day and critical operations, and if you are currently managing these tools yourselves. Apart from Atlassian Cloud, if you are looking to self-host, then the primary models are you could be hosting Atlassian tools in the server version, or you could be considering moving to the data center or already on data center. You could be deploying these tools currently in your own internal infrastructure or on some public cloud. However, in today's webinar, we will go over how you should be deploying these on AWS and specifically the data center version of the tools. And you may wonder, why consider data center? Why not just deploy the server version of the Atlassian tools on the public cloud and on AWS? And in order to understand the problems that data centers solve, let's look at a simple analogy. And the analogy will be of a large supermarket. In a supermarket, you typically have cash registers where you check out once you complete your shopping. And imagine if you only had a single cash register, that is going to be a serious bottleneck. You will not be able to serve your customers in an optimal way. Your customers may not be very happy in terms of the wait time that they may encounter. However, if you had multiple cash registers, you would be able to process the queue quicker, and you also have a better chance of having uninterrupted business if there was some unforeseen circumstances, such as your cash register dying. So if your cash register breaks down on you, and if you only have a single cash register, then you pretty much may need to shut down the store until you fix the single cash register that you have. However, with multiple cash registers, even if you lose one of these cash registers, while you're waiting for the replacement, you can still service the customers with the remaining cash registers that you may have. So that's all and good. But what if you have an extreme unforeseen event? Now, we look at the analogy of a supermarket, but if you look at the role of IT and how IT is responsible for providing critical tools and services like the Atlassian tools that you rely on, you need to be prepared for a significant negative event. It could be a disaster caused by some natural calamities, or your data center goes up in flames. You need to be prepared for all of these scenarios. And in IT, the way you tackle these is with disaster recovery. Without a disaster recovery plan, you would not be prepared for this event. And there is a high probability that without the disaster recovery plan, there is going to be a high impact on your business and its day-to-day operations. But with a disaster recovery plan, there should be minimal to no impact on your business. So ideally, you want to have a solution which incorporates a very well-architected disaster recovery solution. And if you think about the supermarket analogy, you can extrapolate that to IT and how IT may be hosting some of the tools that you use on a day-to-day basis on a server. And if you are hosting all of these tools on a single server, that's a single point of failure, like the cash register in the supermarket. If you are distributing these across multiple servers, then you may have a better chance of recovering from these kinds of failures. And overall, the expectation from IT is that they need to be prepared for downtime. They need to minimize the downtime of critical applications because downtime is expensive, especially if your entire organization is relying on these tools for their day-to-day work. The uptime and responsiveness and performance of critical tools like the Atlassian tools have a direct correlation with the day-to-day productivity of the employees as well as the organization as a whole. So we define the problem statement, and now let's look at why data center is a solution to a lot of these problems that we talked about. So data center is a deployment model for Atlassian tools. And if you have mission critical Atlassian applications, you need to consider migrating to data center. The reason being, it provides high availability. It also provides performance at scale, and it allows you to instantly scale. So you don't need to rely on vertical scaling. With data center, you can scale horizontally across multiple application nodes, as well as you can eliminate your single points of failure in your infrastructure and its architecture. It also allows for performance at scale. So apart from downtime, complete downtime, your users may also be suffering from slow responsiveness of these applications. And a lot of organizations face this problem because the Atlassian tools have a rich feature set, and they become popular over time. That means you have to expect the number of concurrent users to go up over time because of how successful the Atlassian tools tend to be in an organization. But that means you need to be prepared to handle the concurrent user capacity. You cannot compromise on performance. And you need to design a resilient application infrastructure framework. And then in terms of scalability as well, as soon as you are approaching the concurrent limit for the number of users you're able to handle, you need to be able to expand for future growth with strategies such as being able to add multiple nodes or new nodes in your cluster. And then with tools, especially like JIRA software, you need to rely on the indexing feature. So anytime you add nodes or even in your day-to-day JIRA administration operations, you need to be able to handle reindexing in a more efficient manner. Also, the data center model is attractive because it also doesn't force you to plan for the pricing based on the number of nodes. The Atlassian standard pricing model is based on the number of users, and that is true for both the server and the data center version of the tools. And then in terms of disaster recovery as well, data center has features which enable you to set up and be prepared for remote disaster recovery. You can extend your disaster recovery plans beyond a single physical data center. You can extend it to multiple remote data centers as well. And the reason being that the data center version of the Atlassian tools have very specific features which will enable you to recover from an extreme event. So for example, if you are dealing with JIRA, JIRA has the index, and data center has features which allow you to replicate the index. It also enables you to replicate your file system, and then you also need to typically account for replicating your database in order to have a efficient disaster recovery solution in place. With tools like Bitbucket, they also have some very interesting data center features such as smart mirroring, where if you have developers spread out across the globe, you can have local smart mirrors at different geolocations, which can improve the interaction that your development team has with Git and with your Bitbucket server. So overall, the data center provides high availability with active clustering, which will enable uninterrupted access. So if you lose one of the nodes, the user will seamlessly be served from the remaining application nodes in your cluster. You're able to use load balancing technology to distribute your load across multiple nodes. And overall, it enables you to design infrastructure architecture, which will eliminate single points of failure. So we've talked about what the data center architecture looks like, but then we noticed that there are different kinds of infrastructure components, such as the shared file system. We have to also choose appropriate type of load balancer and configure it. And then we also need to decide what database to go with. There are different types of considerations, such as the particular version of the Atlassian data center tools support particular versions of the relational databases. There are exceptions, such as for Bitbucket, it's not MySQL is not supported, so you have to ensure you use one of these other databases and so on. So overall, if you are looking to host data center version of the Atlassian tools on your own infrastructure or even on the public cloud, and if you're trying to create an arbitrary type of architecture, you have to make a lot of decisions in terms of what type of database to use, how do you architect your storage, how do you architect your database, how do you architect network and security, and so on. And a lot of organizations are considering moving to the public cloud, and Amazon AWS or Amazon Web Services is the forefront leader in the space. So a lot of organizations are either already using AWS for their Atlassian tools or for the non-Atlassian tools, or they already have an initiative in place or in the near future for migrating their workloads, both Atlassian and non-Atlassian, to AWS. Now, AWS itself is a very powerful platform because it has several features which make it the ideal platform for deploying your mission-critical tools. But in terms of the specific features for the Atlassian tools, AWS has partnered up with Atlassian to create some standard deployment templates that you can use to rapidly deploy the data center version of the Atlassian tools. These templates are at the code or script level in the form of CloudFormation templates. So AWS has the concept of infrastructure as code, and you can define these through CloudFormation templates. However, there is an overall solution called QuickStart Guide, and the QuickStart Guide encompasses the CloudFormation template as well as vetted standard infrastructure architecture for the different tools that you may be looking to deploy. And there is also an extensive user guide in terms of what are the different configuration options available in the template and how you can customize it for your needs. Also, they have some pretty decent defaults. So if you are looking to deploy Atlassian tools on AWS, or if you're looking to migrate your existing tools to AWS, you should strongly consider data center for the reasons that we've already discussed. And then if you are ready to go with data center, then you should strongly considering building on top of the QuickStart templates that are available for deploying the Atlassian tools, the data center version of the tools on AWS. Currently, there are QuickStart templates for JIRA, Confluence, and Bitbucket data center. And next, we will look at some of the details in terms of what does the architecture of each of these data center tools AWS looks like, as well as what are some of the migration strategies that you should be aware of, as well as some helpful, hopefully helpful links, which could be some follow-up reading that you could do. Now, in terms of the prerequisites, Atlassian and AWS highly recommend deploying a QuickStart template called the Atlassian Standard Infrastructure, or ASI, on AWS. And ASI is a QuickStart template which enables you to create the prerequisites for deploying JIRA, Confluence, and Bitbucket data center on the same virtual private cloud, or VPC. Basically, if you deploy the ASI QuickStart template, it will provide you with the underlying common architecture that is required for deploying multiple Atlassian data center tools. If you are only looking to deploy a single Atlassian data center tool, then you don't need to necessarily deploy ASI. You can directly deploy the QuickStart template for that particular tool. And we will look at the QuickStart template for each of these tools, and you will see that the way it works is it builds on top of ASI if available, and if not, it will deploy those components as well. But most of our customers, what we find is that they do deploy at least more than one data center version of the tool on AWS. So for those users, they should consider ASI. And this ASI, provides common components, including the VPC, as well as the different types of subnets required, and also the Bastion host, which you would use if you need to access any of the application nodes. So next, let's look at JIRA Data Center on AWS using the QuickStart template. We also have the link to the QuickStart template at the bottom of the slide. And also after the webinar, we will send you an email with a link to download the slides if you need to reference these along with the links included. And as for JIRA Data Center on AWS, if you've already deployed the ASI, then the JIRA Data Center QuickStart with the default values, you can deploy the entire setup in as less as 30 minutes. That is the documented time provided in the QuickStart documentation and the guide for the time required to deploy JIRA Data Center on AWS. And if you're using the console, it's pretty much point and click across the wizard for the QuickStart. And in terms of the architecture, you can see that it builds on top of the ASI components like the VPC and the public subnet and the private subnet. But in terms of the specifics of this particular QuickStart, it adds the auto-scaling group for the JIRA nodes. And all of this in the entire architecture is spread out across multiple availability zones. And in terms of the shared file system, Amazon EFS is utilized. As for the database, the Postgres database on AWS RDS is used. So earlier, if you recall, when we were reviewing the general architecture of data center, we had to make decisions on the type of load balancer to use, the type of shared file system to use, and even the relational database. But if you go with the QuickStart template, it standardizes on Postgres hosted using the Amazon RDS service. It uses EFS for the shared file system, and then there are the standard load balancers that AWS offers. If you are looking to migrate your existing JIRA instance, then the high-level steps entail migrating your database to Postgres if you are already not on Postgres. So one of the prerequisites that you should strongly consider before doing the AWS migration is to move to Postgres if you are using if your JIRA instance is using some other type of database currently. Next, there are instructions, the Atlassian documentation, but overall you have to take a backup of your existing JIRA home directory, and then you would back up and restore the Postgres database of your existing instance to the AWS RDS instance. This link again has the full guide as well as some additional steps for the migration. Once you deploy your JIRA instance on AWS, you should strongly consider having an effective monitoring strategy in place. And recently, Atlassian published a pretty detailed guide in terms of how Atlassian themselves monitors some of their largest JIRA instances. So it's a very interesting read, and you should be able to pick out some helpful strategies, including what kind of metrics and what kind of infrastructure monitoring details you should consider, and you can also compare with what Atlassian is currently doing for their instances as well. Atlassian also has a pretty detailed guide for how you can get started with data center monitoring, including some of the recommended monitoring tools that work effectively. Okay. Sorry, slight technical difficulty here. Okay, and now let's move on to Confluence Data Center on AWS. And if we look at the architecture, again, it looks very similar to JIRA Data Center. The key difference is that there is an additional component, which is the node for Synchrony. So Synchrony is a service which enables the collaborative editing feature within Confluence. So this is a service that needs to be deployed along with the application nodes. In terms of the migration strategy, again, pretty similar in terms of migrating to Postgres if your Confluence instance is already not on Postgres. And then in terms of backing up your data, you only need to worry about the attachment directory and the database. And then in terms of restoring the file system, the Atlassian documentation covers it pretty well. Atlassian also has a similar guide for how they monitor the Confluence instances. Again, a very helpful read. And then again, the general page on how to get started with data center monitoring is pretty helpful. So next, let's look at Bitbucket Data Center. And for Bitbucket Data Center, there is a key difference in comparison to JIRA and Confluence. And the difference is that it does not use EFS. So Atlassian has documented this pretty well, but because of the nature of how Git is, disk bound in terms of I/O operations, it can have very bursty I/O requirements. So EFS does not satisfy the requirements for deploying Bitbucket Data Center on AWS. Instead, the QuickStart template deploys an NFS cluster, and that is used as an alternative to EFS for the shared file system. And that is the key difference in comparison to the other tools. In terms of the migration approach, again, it's recommended to migrate to Postgres if you're not already on Postgres, and then you also have to back up your existing home directory and database. However, the mechanism for taking the backup is using the Bitbucket DIY backup tool. So in the Atlassian documentation, there is more information on how this backup works, but it is recommended to back up your existing instance using the DIY backup. And then there are steps on how you can restore the backup, documented in the Atlassian documentation. And again, similar to JIRA and Confluence, Atlassian does a pretty great job of documenting how they monitor their own Bitbucket instance, and you should look to implement similar monitoring strategies. And then the same link for some general strategies on how to get started. So we've taken a very quick tour across all of the data center features, as well as what does the architecture of these data center tools on AWS look like. However, you might have noticed that it still requires quite a bit of work. The QuickStart templates automate the overall process of deploying these tools. However, you may still want to work with an expert like Addteq to help you deploy these tools on AWS. And the other thing to consider is that you may not want to host and manage these tools yourself. So you could potentially also offload the responsibility for deploying these tools, for migrating your existing instances, as well as for keeping these tools up and running in a healthy state, meeting your SLA by utilizing Addteq's managed hosting service, which we call CodeFactory. And Addteq is not only an Atlassian partner, like we talked about, but we are also a partner with AWS, and we utilize both of our expertise in the Atlassian realm as well as with AWS in order to facilitate our customers for performing their migration. And we have customers who either manage these tools themselves or they look to offload the hosting and management of these tools to our managed hosting service, CodeFactory. And then in terms of some of the key benefits that you can expect if you decide to go with Addteq for your migration and hosting needs is that we can help drive down the operational cost, because a lot of our customers previously had full-time staff dedicated to keeping these tools up and running. But instead, you can offload this to our managed hosting service, and you only need to worry about utilizing these tools. You still have full administrative access, and you still have the capability to customize these tools to your needs. But overall, this can help bring down the operational cost. We have some customers who have saved, up to 80% of what they were previously spending on managing these tools themselves, including the hosting cost, the cost of having an effective backup and disaster recovery strategy in place, as well as the support required for keeping it up and running, also maintenance and upgrades. And additionally, because of our partnership with AWS, we can also help you apply for AWS credits. So if you are looking to migrate these tools from your on-prem infrastructure or from some other cloud service to AWS, then AWS offers this service where we as a partner can apply for AWS credits on your behalf, and it may be able to offset some of the initial costs for your infrastructure when you are performing this migration and moving to AWS. And overall, we can help you build operational resiliency and business agility by relying on Code Factory instead of managing these yourself. And if you still strongly need to host these tools yourself, if you have a plan to migrate to AWS, we can still assist you as we have done with multiple customers in the past. So in terms of the next steps, I would highly encourage you to visit codefactory.com to learn more about our offering, including managed hosting and support and migration services. And then I will be around for the next few minutes for any questions. If you have any, please feel free to post that in the GoToWebinar question section. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we will also be sending an email within the next few days, which will have a recap of the webinar along with the link to download the slides. Thank you very much for joining us today. And then if you have any questions, please post those in the question section. Thank you.